Welcome to another episode of Something to Say with Avi Solomon. We're still in beta version, so there's not like 100 different podcasts to find me on YouTube. We're doing it one by one, seeing how successful it goes. This is the second episode of Something to Say with Avi Solomon. The first one still has to be uploaded onto YouTube, so in a certain sense, this is actually could be counted as the first one. That being said, we have a lot to discuss as the election is coming very close, and there's a number of things that I want to discuss. Number one is the Supreme Court nominee, Amy Barrett. Number two is mail-in ballots and the controversy there. Those are the two main issues that I really think this episode is going to cover. I'll also discuss Trump and his COVID-19 and the media's coverage of that and how he played it out. So let's begin with Amy Barrett. And the real truth is, President Trump said in the first debate, and maybe we'll make that a fourth discussion, but President Trump said in the first debate that he's not doing, and the Republicans and Mitch McConnell are not doing anything that the Democrats wouldn't do if the roles were reversed, which in 2016 presidential election, the roles were reversed. If you remember, unfortunately, Anthony Scalia, the Supreme Court justice, conservative, passed away shortly before the election. And what happened? President Obama nominated Judge Garland, and the Republicans, Mitch McConnell, and the Republican Senate refused to take it up. Now, flash forward 4 years now, and the roles are reversed. And Mitch McConnell all of a sudden is a very big believer that right before an election that the Senate should take it up. Now, he gave a whole speech. He's like, well, back then it was because the Democrats only had the White House and the Republicans had the House and the Senate. And this time we have the House and the Senate. And when I say the House, I mean the White House. And therefore, that makes a difference. No, Mitch McConnell, don't lie to the American people. People are so sick. If there's one lesson to take about Donald Trump and his rise to power, it is that the American people are so sick of political rhetoric. They are sick of it like there's no tomorrow. So you think because you get up there and you're going to spin it in a different version that why now it's okay and 4 years ago it wasn't okay? The answer is exactly as Donald Trump said. Because you have the power right now to put a nominee in and the Democrats don't. And 4 years ago, the president belonged to the Democrats, but they didn't have the Senate. And that's it. It's winner takes all. That's the only real difference. And that's the only reason. And you'll have senators say, no, it's this reason, it's that reason, and they'll paint the Democrats as evil. The real truth is probably that it would make sense to wait till after the elections and let the American people have a say in who should be the next Supreme Court nominee, whether it should be a conservative or a liberal. And let's be honest. And I don't like that. I'm a conservative, more or less. I like to think of myself as a moderate conservative, but I am happy with what Trump's doing and what Mitch McConnell are doing, and I hope they do get Amy Barrett in there before the election. But that's because of my ideology and my hopes for where the country should go. Has nothing to do with intellectually what's right. What's right intellectually, if you'll ask me, is that the American people who are about to vote, and they know that whoever they vote for is going to decide what type of Supreme Court nominee gets picked, should definitely have a say in it, especially because it's going to tilt the Supreme Court completely conservative, 6-3. And the American people shouldn't have a say in that? Oh, I know the answer is, well, all Supreme Court nominees are completely, they call it down the middle. They don't side with their parties. They don't side with that is such garbage. And anyone who hears it knows it's garbage. The Supreme Court has made itself, maybe it was once upon a time founded to be like that. And even that you could argue. But the Supreme Court has definitely, for the last 100, probably the last 150, 200 years, maybe probably since its existence even, has always been a third branch of government where its actual design is not to be a third branch in the sense it's supposed to be neutral, but it's not. All the judges have ideologies. They have positions that they take, which usually lean conservative or Republican. And look at the one judge of recent, before him it was Judge Anthony Kennedy, I believe. Judge Kennedy, I'm not sure. But Judge Kennedy was known to be, sometimes he was known to be a conservative, and sometimes he went with the liberals, and the conservatives cursed him out. And the same goes for Chief Justice Roberts, that he's known to be a conservative, but every now and then he goes with the Democrats. Now, whether that's actually a very well thought out reason to try and preserve the name of the Supreme Court, which some people have argued, or whether that's how he really sees it, I don't think that's how he really saw Obamacare. I think in 2008, 2009, I think it came to the Supreme Court in 2009, actually. But when the Supreme Court originally ruled on Obamacare, I think Justice Roberts wanted to preserve the Supreme Court, and so he looked for a way to vote with the liberal part of the Supreme Court to keep Obamacare intact. But not because he believes in it, and he came up with a whole speech of how that it had to come from the tax bill it came from the wrong side of the government, etc. But the point really there is that most of the Supreme Court justices are completely ideologues. They go with either the conservatives or the liberals, and therefore don't give this political rhetoric that they're all neutral and they all call it down the middle. And I'm sure Amy Barrett's a great judge. I'm sure she's a smart person, but she has an ideology. She's a conservative, and most of the cases that come before her are going to go. She'll probably rule in favor of the conservatives. If Roe versus Wade comes to her, she's probably going to rule against abortion. And the American people, therefore, you could intellectually argue, when you take away your bias, should have a right and should have a say that that's the Supreme Court they want to have. The Supreme Court is not a neutral branch of the government. It's just not. And anyone who tries to say it is, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, are simply lying. It's just political rhetoric. So therefore, as a moderate conservative, I'm happy. I want the Supreme Court to be conservative. But if you're intellectually honest, anyone who would be intellectually honest, knowing the nature of what the Supreme Court, not what it should have been, what the Founding Fathers may have thought it, designed it, that it should have been, but what it is today, knowing that there is absolutely no reason that the American people shouldn't have a say since it's right before the election. That's just my personal opinion. You could argue president for 4 years, so therefore he has all 4 years. And could you make a constitutional argument for that? You absolutely can. They gave the presidency 4 years, and therefore you could make a constitutional argument that the president has all the right in the world to name Amy Barrett. But then what happened 4 years ago? Well, the answer is the Senate could argue we used our constitutional right to block Judge Garland from becoming a Supreme Court justice. And it's all games. And it's all about keeping power. It's all about winner takes all. It's making sure that your people are in power and your people are going to push the agenda that you want. And therefore, it comes to the separate question is if the Republicans lose the House in 2020, and when I say the House, I mean the White House, and if they lose the Senate, the Democrats, if the Republicans push this nominee through, the Democrats are very strongly probably going to look to pack the court. And it's not because it's the right thing. It's because it's a winner-takes-all mentality in Washington, D.C. And everything else is nothing more than political rhetoric. It's the end of the story. That's all there is to say. And Trump said it. Trump said it in the debate. He said, we have the Senate, we have the House, and if the Democrats had the roles reversed, they would do the exact same thing. Simple as that. There's anything else that, no, she's a great justice and she'll call it down the middle. And, this is the reason why. Those are all excuses. Those are all political rhetoric. And it shows another thing. Which is in the battle to win everything, for winner takes all, the one thing politicians could care less about is the American people. They could care less about the American people. Because if they really did care about the American people, and they really cared about the average person's right to have a say in the government, they would let this go to the election. Now let's turn to the election. Let's discuss mail-in ballots. And, you talk about dishonesty. The media and the Democrats are completely dishonest about mail-in ballots. I have not read one article in CNN or MSNBC or Yahoo News or many other liberal affiliate media outlets that have even entertained the idea, just to entertain the idea, that the mail-in ballots are susceptible to fraud. I remember I read one line on CNN, I think similar on Yahoo News, that this, of course, the line was along the lines, perfectly valid mail-in ballots. When we've seen videos of people trying to sell mail-in ballots, we saw mail-in ballot fraud during the primaries, and they have the gall, the nerve to use a Yiddish word, the chutzpah, to simply straight up lie and say, perfectly valid. There's no question that there could be any fraud. No, there is a question that there could be fraud. And I'm not saying, now, I think the Trump campaign and the Republicans propose a very valid solution. Mail-in ballot, someone's concerned? Absolutely. Let them request a ballot. What is illogical about that? And the answer is that the Democrats know that the name of the game is steal the election. And I'll prove it to you like this. Does this mean that the Democrats are going to successfully steal the election? No. The Republicans, I pray, that the Republicans are going to keep very much on top of them, and any ballot that's thrown out or disqualified will be questioned. But let's look at it this way. Let's say that Biden could steal the election. Let's say he knew he could steal the election and not get caught. And if he didn't steal the election, Trump would win, fair and square. Now, what do you think Biden would do? Let's reverse that question. Let's say Trump knew. Let's say the polls are accurate and Trump knew that he was going to lose the election. By the way, I don't think the polls are accurate. I think it's, number one, they're very biased, the polls. And number two is that a lot of people who support Trump are afraid to say it. They're just afraid to be labeled racist. So they either say, no, I really support Biden, or they just lie. Whatever it is, or they refuse to answer the question. So the polls is a different discussion, but they're not accurate in my opinion. And why is, by the way, is a great reason for the liberal media to say that the polls 14%, because if you're going to steal the election and you say that the polls, if Trump was up by 14 points, and then what happened was they came out election day and Trump loses, people might say, well, what? He was up by 14 points. How did that happen? So it's a great scam to steal an election if you say and lie through the polls by creating biased polls. Oh, Biden's up by 14 points. And then on top of that, on top of saying Biden's up by 14 points, you also steal the votes with mail-in ballots. It's the perfect scam to steal an election. But keeping them separate and just going back to the mail-in ballots, we have seen in multiple states' primaries that there was fraud, that there were people that tried to steal the election, there were people that tried to rig the election in those primaries. We have seen, whether it's on WhatsApp through some viral video or YouTube or even some stations that may have media outlets that have shown it, there have been people trying to sell ballots. There have been people taking 50 ballots out of mailboxes and putting them in. There is clearly, now what percentage I can't tell you, but there is clearly an attempt. There is clearly an attempt to try and steal this election, and I'm sure it's going both ways. I'm sure that there are conservatives or Republican affiliates trying to also manipulate the mail-in ballots. Now, the Democrats are probably doing it much stronger, much harsher, and much smarter. That's why the media and the Democrats are, oh, you can't suppress the vote. Of course we have to go with mail. They know that the side of the scales for stealing an election with mail-in ballots, they have the upper hand. And so it's very scary. And I agree that Trump, they condemned him for saying, and these coward Republicans that said, oh, he can't say such a thing. Trump was very smart for saying he's not just going to concede the election if he doesn't believe he lost fair and square. What do you want him to do? You want him to say, oh, yes, please steal the election from me. This is hundreds of millions of dollars go into a presidential election campaign. Oh, yes, I realize you want to try and steal the election, and I'm just going to smile and give it to you. And Republicans said, oh, no, he should have, of course he should accept the election results. It's not a question of a peaceful transfer of power. It's a question of letting someone simply steal the election. And Trump was brilliant and smart for saying, I am not going to let you simply steal the election. I am going to make you afraid to try and steal the election. And I don't think it's the reverse where no matter what happens, he's going to question the election. It's just simply if there is scandalous and questionable things that go on during the mail-in ballot process, Trump is going to call that out as you see it. And believe me, there will be. Believe me, there will be. Now, another thing on mail-in ballots is, you know what? If it could be done without fraud, it's actually a great way to increase the voter turnout. That's one thing in America we always say, increase the voter turnout, increase the voter turnout. This is actually a great way to increase the voter turnout. And let's be honest, the reason Republicans are not big believers most of the time in increasing the voter turnout is because when voter turnout is increased, it usually works in the favor of the Democrats, not the Republicans. So you could argue that as well, that the mail-in ballots is merely, it's not stealing an election per se, even though I believe because we've seen the fraud that has gone on, we've seen people taking signatures 50, 500 at a shot and just throwing it out and saying they didn't count. I wonder if this pandemic had broken out before the Democratic primary had begun. I wonder then if Democrats would have been against mail-in ballots. If all of those different Democrats that were running, you had Biden, you had, Bernie Sanders, you had Elizabeth Warren. I wonder if Elizabeth Warren would have trusted Bernie Sanders with mail-in ballots. Or Biden, do you think Biden would have trusted? I mean, Bernie Sanders was a straight-up communist. He admired and he spent time in communist Russia. So I don't think he would have had any qualms or problems with trying to steal an election. I wonder then if Biden would have been a fan of mail-in ballots or the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party hated Bernie Sanders. If that would have been the case, if the pandemic had broken out a few months earlier, I guarantee you they wouldn't, oh no, the mail-in ballots, we can't do that. We got to find another way. Or we got to make sure that Bernie plays fair, because they know what it's about. And everyone knows that it's all about containing and holding power. And if you have to steal it, you can steal it. There's a lot of people that say that Bush stole the election in 2000, that he stole the election from Al Gore. And you know what? Could be. Could be he did. It could be he did. And you know what? Certain conservatives, I think that I heard Michael Savage once say this, not to say that he's mainstream or conservative. He said, I don't care. I don't care if he stole the election. In the end of the day, he made sure that the Republicans had power. Now, I don't know ultimately if the country benefited from Bush being in power in 2000, when in 2001 we had the World Trade Center, as most Republicans now all of a sudden support Trump, who says that the war was a bad idea. So maybe we would have been better off. I'm not saying we would have been. Maybe we would have been better off with Al Gore and Democrats, which are less war hungry. But that being said, at the time, Republicans, they didn't want to question it. They didn't care. He stole the election. He didn't steal the election. No one cared. It's all about holding power. And you want to know something? The mail-in ballots, the Democrats probably know games are going to go on and people are going to try and steal. Now, maybe that's 1% of the vote. I don't know what the percentage of the vote is. But in the end of the day, they are going to try to steal this election. Do not think they are not. And that is why they refuse to, A, stop the mail-in ballots and say that you want a mail-in ballot, you have to request it yourself. B, that is why they refuse to even say, yes, it's possible that fraud could happen. because they know that they're going to try and do fraud, and they want that fraud to happen. And then C is they say, oh, the polls, Trump's up by 20%. Trump is down by 14%. The latest NBC Wall Street poll has him down by 14%. Oh, you clearly see the polls justify the ballot results. And in the end of the day, Trump tried his best. He couldn't stop them. Hopefully, he'll keep them on their toes. It should be anyone caught doing mail-in fraud, mail ballot in fraud, 20 years in prison. Make it 20 years in prison. Make it that they're really going to be afraid to do that fraud. That's not going to be the only safeguard necessary, because a lot of these people who are going to do it are Democratic, loyalists and people who are affiliated with the party, and they'll just go with the belief that, as long as they steal the power, they'll then be protected by Biden and the Democratic goons who are going to ultimately control him and really hold on to that power. And so that concludes the section 2, which is the mail-in ballots. And then the final thing to discuss is the debate, which is the presidential debate, which currently happened. And if you're honest about it, the only reason that debate did not hurt Trump is because people are used to Trump. They're used to Trump and his loud mouth and interrupting people and talking over people. But that debate was obnoxious, and that's a nice way of putting it. Trump went way too strong with the interrupting. Now, did Biden interrupt? Yes, Biden interrupted. This goes again to conservatives not having intellectual honesty, where they said, did Biden win that debate? No. I think he was heavily drugged up, and he was half the time just smiling at the camera, smiling, not saying anything substantial. Could be he had an earpiece, could be he didn't, I don't know. Doesn't really matter, because in the end of the day, he didn't win that debate. But the one thing Trump did do is he came off way too strong, came off of a lot obnoxious. And then all of a sudden people came out. Chris Wallace is really a registered Democrat, and Wallace, it was Trump debating Wallace and debating Biden. I don't have any qualms with Chris Wallace. I didn't see people complaining about Chris Wallace hosting the debate before the election. I didn't see anyone saying, oh, he's a registered Democrat, he's really going to be against Trump. It's only afterwards. Trump has the loyalist followers. The greatest way Trump described it was they would take a bullet for him he said he could shoot a person on Fifth Avenue and they wouldn't call for his arrest. And that's really the truth. No matter what Trump does with the Trump super loyalist, no matter what he does, he could shoot a person on Fifth Avenue and he had to have been justified. So that debate, Trump messed it up. Did Biden win? No, Biden didn't win. He didn't say one thing substantial. He didn't say one thing that was worthy of being heard. And the real reason is because Biden's just a puppet for the Democratic Party. You're not voting for Biden if you vote for Biden. You're voting for Kamala Harris, and you're voting for Democratic, the old guard that's been in, some of the people who have been as way back as Hillary Clinton's time. And those are the people who are going to be in power if you vote for Biden. So did he win the election? He didn't. Did he win the debate? He did not win that debate. But Trump did not win that debate either, and Trump hurt himself. And the only thing that saved Trump was the fact that people are used to him being that obnoxious. They're used to him being that loud. Okay, thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of Something to Say with Avi Solomon. Have a great day and a blessed one. Take care.